The desert wind carried whispers of something wrong. At Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, the usual morning chaos felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm. Intelligence reports had been flooding in for 3 days about unusual Taliban movements in the Kunar Valley, but what caught everyone's attention wasn't the enemy's positioning. It was the silence. Major Victoria Reaper Kozlowski stood at the edge of the tarmac, her weathered flight suit catching the harsh morning sun. The nickname had followed her for 8 years, earned not through bravado but through something far more unsettling: her ability to appear exactly where the enemy least expected death to arrive. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet everything still to lose. The mystery began 48 hours earlier when a Special Forces reconnaissance team, call sign Wolverine, had gone dark during a routine patrol near the Pakistan border. Their last transmission was fragmentary, filled with static and what sounded like panic. Multiple contacts, unknown aircraft. Say again, unknown aircraft inbound. Then nothing. Satellite imagery showed their vehicles abandoned in a narrow canyon, but no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just empty Humvees and questions that made seasoned intelligence officers uncomfortable. What made this particular morning different was the phone call that had woken Colonel Marcus Henderson at 3:47 hours. The voice belonged to General Patricia Reeves, a woman who didn't make social calls from the Pentagon at 3 in the morning. Her message was brief and cryptic. "Marcus, I need your best pilot in the air within 6 hours. Not your most experienced, not your most decorated, your best, the one who sees things others miss." Henderson had ended the call knowing exactly who she meant, though the thought made his coffee taste like ash. Victoria Kozlowski was undeniably skilled. Her service record read like a highlight reel of impossible missions, completed with surgical precision. But she was also the pilot other aviators whispered about in mess halls, the one who made even veteran ground controllers nervous when she requested clearance for unconventional approaches. The irony wasn't lost on Henderson. 12 years ago, when Kozlowski had first arrived at flight school, the instructors had placed bets on how quickly she'd wash out. Too small, they said. Too quiet. Too intense. She had a way of staring at people that made them forget whatever point they were trying to make. The betting pool had grown to nearly $3,000 by the end of her first month. Now, as Henderson watched her conduct her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of a surgeon, he wondered if those same instructors ever thought about their lost money, or if they ever wondered what they had failed to recognize in the small-framed woman who moved around aircraft like she was reading their souls. The A-10 Thunderbolt II waiting for Victoria looked like it had survived several wars, because it had. Its titanium bathtub cockpit bore scars from small arms fire, and its nose art, a grinning skull wearing aviator sunglasses, had been personally painted by a crew chief who believed aircraft needed personalities to stay alive. The twin General Electric turbofan engines hummed with barely contained violence, their distinctive whine promising devastation to anyone foolish enough to find themselves in their path. Victoria's hands moved across the aircraft's surfaces with practiced intimacy, checking control surfaces, inspecting the GAU-8 Avenger cannon that formed the plane's spine, ensuring the weapon systems that would soon deliver 30 rounds at 3,900 rounds per minute were functioning perfectly. Other pilots called it a pre-flight inspection. Victoria called it a conversation with an old friend. "Morning, beautiful," she whispered to the aircraft, her voice barely audible over the engine noise from other planes preparing for dawn patrols. "Looks like we're going hunting again." The mission briefing had been frustratingly vague. Fly to grid coordinates 34, 7,128 degrees N, 70, 9,217 degrees E. Provide close air support for a search and rescue operation. Maintain radio contact with ground controller Lighthouse. Standard stuff, except for the part where Colonel Henderson had pulled her aside afterward and said, "Victoria, I need you to trust your instincts on this one. More than usual." She had nodded, understanding immediately. In 12 years of military flying, she had learned that the most dangerous missions were often the ones that sounded routine on paper. The ones where commanders spoke in careful euphemisms and avoided direct eye contact. The ones where you were told to trust your instincts, because the people giving orders weren't entirely sure what you might encounter. As she climbed into the cockpit, Victoria caught sight of her reflection in the canopy glass. The face looking back showed the accumulated weight of 1,847 combat flight hours, countless close calls, and the kind of hypervigilance that came from spending years as one of the few women in a profession dominated by men who questioned her presence. Her dark eyes held secrets she couldn't share and knowledge she couldn't forget. The radio crackled to life as she completed her startup sequence. Reaper 17, this is Tower. You are cleared for takeoff, runway 09. Contact departure control on 257.8. Godspeed. Victoria keyed her microphone. Tower, Reaper 17 rolling. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of acceleration as 22,000 pounds of armored aircraft began its sprint down the runway. The moment of liftoff always felt like breaking free from gravity's conspiracy, a brief triumph of engineering and willpower over the Earth's attempts to keep her grounded. At 5,000 feet, she banked toward the mountains, leaving behind the relative safety of the airfield for the unforgiving landscape where men disappeared without explanation, and silence could mean anything from victory to catastrophe. Below her, Afghanistan's terrain unfolded like a poorly written map, all jagged ridges and hidden valleys that had swallowed armies for centuries. 30 minutes into the flight, Victoria's radio erupted with the voice she had been expecting. Reaper 17, this is Lighthouse. Switch to Secure Channel 7 for mission update. The voice belonged to Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, a ground controller known for her ability to guide aircraft through impossible situations with the calm precision of a chess master. Lighthouse, Reaper switching to 7, Victoria replied, adjusting her radio frequency. The secure channel carried an immediate sense of urgency that made her grip the stick a little tighter. Reaper, we've got movement in Sector Charlie 4. Multiple heat signatures, approximately 15 personnel, moving toward the last known position of our missing team. I need you to provide overwatch and be prepared for immediate close air support if required. Victoria acknowledged the transmission while scanning the mountainous terrain below. The Kunar Valley stretched out like a scar across the landscape, its ridges and defiles offering countless hiding places for both friend and enemy. Somewhere in that maze of rock and shadow, American soldiers were either fighting for their lives or already dead, and she was their only hope of finding out which. Lighthouse, Reaper has visual on the valley. Beginning reconnaissance pattern. Any specific rules of engagement? The pause that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds too long. In military communications, hesitation usually meant someone was choosing their words very carefully. Reaper, you are authorized to engage any hostile targets that pose an immediate threat to friendly forces. However, be advised that we have limited intelligence on enemy capabilities in your area. Maintain heightened awareness. Victoria understood the subtext perfectly. The ground controller was telling her that they had no idea what she might be facing, but if American lives were at stake, she had permission to turn the mountainside into a smoking crater if necessary. It was the kind of authorization that came with both unlimited trust and unlimited responsibility. Banking into a slow orbit above the valley, Victoria began the methodical process of hunting. Her eyes swept across the terrain below, looking for the subtle signs that separated empty landscape from hidden danger. Disturbed earth, unnatural shadows, the geometric patterns that revealed human activity in places where humans weren't supposed to be. The A-10 sensors painted the ground in infrared signatures, revealing heat sources that ranged from sun-warmed rocks to potentially hostile personnel. Victoria's training took over as she began the deadly calculus of modern warfare, sorting threats from shadows, determining which heat signatures represented enemy combatants and which might be the missing American team. Through her headset, she could hear the controlled tension in Lighthouse's voice as additional reports filtered in. Reaper, we're receiving intermittent emergency beacon signals from the valley floor. Signal strength suggests our people may still be alive, but we're unable to establish voice contact. The mission had just become exponentially more complex. Victoria was no longer just hunting enemies. She was racing against time to find American soldiers who might be wounded, trapped, or worse. Every decision she made in the next hour could mean the difference between bringing her countrymen home and watching them disappear into the same silence that had claimed their last transmission. As she adjusted her flight pattern to begin a more systematic search, Victoria caught herself thinking about the betting pool from flight school. $3,000 wagered on her failure, placed by instructors who saw her small frame and quiet demeanor and assumed they understood her limitations. She wondered what those same men would think if they could see her now, alone in the cockpit of a tank-killing aircraft, hunting enemies in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The thought carried a bitter satisfaction that she quickly suppressed. This wasn't about proving anything to people who had underestimated her 12 years ago. This was about finding American soldiers and bringing them home alive, regardless of what it cost her personally or professionally. Below her, the valley kept its secrets, but Victoria had learned long ago that mountains always revealed their truths to those patient enough to listen. She just hoped she would have enough time to hear what this particular mountain was trying to tell her before it was too late. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Victoria methodically searched grid square after grid square, her eyes burning from the intensity of scanning endless rock formations and shadowed crevices. The A-10's sensors provided technological assistance, but in terrain this complex, human intuition often proved more reliable than electronic eyes. Lighthouse Reaper. I'm picking up possible vehicle signatures near grid 340-7709. Two heat sources, consistent with abandoned Humvees, but I'm not seeing any personnel in the immediate vicinity. Copy that, Reaper. That matches our satellite intelligence from yesterday. The vehicles were found abandoned with no signs of struggle, but our people are definitely missing. Continue your search pattern. Victoria banked toward the abandoned vehicles, using her aircraft's superior position to examine the site more closely. What she saw through her targeting system made her stomach tighten. The Humvees sat in perfect formation, exactly as they would if the team had stopped for a routine security halt. No blast patterns from IEDs, no bullet impacts, no signs of combat. The scene looked like the occupants had simply vanished. Lighthouse, something's not right down there. The vehicles are too clean, too organized. If there had been an ambush, we'd see evidence of it. This looks more like... She paused, struggling to find words for what her instincts were telling her. This looks like they stopped voluntarily. The silence that followed her transmission lasted longer than professional courtesy allowed. When Santos finally responded, her voice carried a note of concern that made Victoria's pulse quicken. Reaper, say again your assessment. Lighthouse, based on the positioning and condition of the vehicles, I believe the team encountered something that made them abandon their mission willingly. No signs of combat, no defensive positioning. They parked the vehicles and left on foot, heading. Victoria traced the faint tracks visible through her targeting system. Heading northeast, toward the ridgeline. Copy, Reaper. Continue following that trail. Be advised, we're scrambling additional support, but you're our eyes and ears until backup arrives. Victoria acknowledged the transmission while banking to follow the barely visible path the missing team had taken. The trail led away from the relative safety of the valley floor toward increasingly treacherous terrain, the kind of landscape where a single misstep could mean a fatal fall, and where anyone pursuing would be exposed to fire from multiple directions. As she climbed toward the ridgeline, following tracks that were becoming increasingly difficult to identify, Victoria's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. It wasn't from Lighthouse. The voice was male, American, and filled with a desperation that made her blood run cold. Any aircraft, this is Wolverine Actual. We are alive but pinned down. Repeat, Wolverine team is alive but under fire from unknown hostiles. We have wounded and are running low on ammunition. Request immediate assistance. Victoria's training kicked in instantly. Wolverine Actual, this is Reaper 17, A-10 on station. I have your transmission. What is your position? Reaper, thank God. We're in a cave complex approximately 2 clicks northeast of our vehicles. We've got good defensive positions, but we're surrounded. The hostiles. Reaper, these aren't regular Taliban. They have equipment we've never seen before. Advanced weapons, coordinated tactics. We need fire support immediately. Victoria's mind raced as she processed the information. Advanced weapons and coordinated tactics suggested either foreign military advisors or something even more concerning. Wolverine, can you mark your position? I need positive identification before I can engage. Negative on marking, Reaper. We're conserving all electronic signatures. The hostiles seem to have sophisticated detection equipment. We'll guide you in by voice, but you need to be extremely careful. These guys know what they're doing. The situation had just evolved from a search and rescue mission to something approaching conventional warfare against an unknown enemy with capabilities that exceeded normal expectations. Victoria found herself facing the kind of tactical challenge that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. Wolverine, Reaper copies. Describe your immediate surroundings and the enemy positions relative to your location. The response came immediately, delivered in the clipped, professional tone of someone who had been in combat long enough to function despite fear. Reaper, we're in a limestone cave system facing east. Enemy positions are scattered along the ridgeline approximately 300 meters to our west, with additional positions in the valley below. We count at least 20 hostiles, possibly more. They have us in a crossfire and are slowly advancing. Victoria absorbed the tactical picture while simultaneously scanning the terrain through her targeting system. The ridgeline Wolverine described was visible through her sensors, but the limestone formations created a maze of shadows and thermal signatures that made target identification nearly impossible from her current altitude. Wolverine, I need you to understand something. The terrain you're describing makes precision strikes extremely difficult. Any fire support I provide will be danger close by definition. Are you prepared for that level of risk? The pause that followed felt like hours. When the voice returned, it carried the weight of a decision no soldier should have to make. Reaper, we've got 2 wounded who won't survive much longer without medical attention. If we stay here, we're all going to die anyway. We're prepared to accept the risk. Victoria felt the familiar surge of responsibility that came with holding other people's lives in her hands. Every pilot who had ever provided close air support understood the terrible mathematics of combat. Sometimes the greatest act of mercy was the willingness to bring controlled violence close enough to friendly forces that the margin for error disappeared entirely. Wolverine, Reaper copies. I'm beginning my attack run. Keep your heads down and be ready to move when I tell you. She banked the A-10 into a steep dive, feeling the aircraft's frame absorb the stress as she pushed it toward its operational limits. The ridgeline rushed toward her canopy as she lined up on the enemy positions, her finger hovering over the trigger that would unleash the GAU-8 Avenger's devastating firepower. At that moment, with American lives hanging in the balance and enemies in her crosshairs, Victoria thought about the instructors who had bet against her success 12 years ago. Not with anger or vindication, but with the calm satisfaction that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she had been trained to do. The first burst from the GAU-8 lit up the mountainside like the wrath of an angry god. 30mm rounds impacted with the precision of surgical instruments and the devastating power of artillery shells, turning enemy positions into clouds of dust and debris. Victoria pulled out of her dive, already banking for a second pass as she keyed her radio. "Wolverine, Reaper, how copy on that gun run?" The response was immediate and filled with relief. "Reaper, that was beautiful. Enemy fire has ceased from the western ridge. We can see bodies and equipment scattered across the impact area. You've given us breathing room." Victoria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before refocusing on the tactical situation. One successful gun run had eliminated the immediate threat, but the mission was far from over. "Wolverine, can you move toward extraction? I can provide cover while you displace." "Negative, Reaper. We've still got hostiles in the valley below, and our wounded can't move far without assistance. We need to hold this position until ground support arrives." The tactical picture was becoming clearer, but no less dangerous. Victoria had succeeded in breaking the immediate siege, but the missing team remained trapped with limited options and unknown numbers of enemies still in the area. The mission had evolved from search and rescue to sustained combat air patrol, requiring her to maintain station over hostile territory for an extended period. "Wolverine, Reaper will maintain overwatch. Contact Lighthouse for medical evacuation and ground support coordination. I've got enough fuel and ammunition for approximately 90 minutes of combat air patrol." As Victoria established a racetrack pattern above the cave complex, she reflected on the strange turn her morning had taken. What had begun as a routine flight to investigate missing personnel had become the kind of sustained combat operation that would be analyzed in tactical training courses for years to come. The radio crackled with a new voice, Colonel Henderson calling from the operations center at Bagram. "Reaper 17, this is base. We've been monitoring your transmissions. Outstanding work so far. Be advised that we're launching additional aircraft to support your mission, but you'll be alone on station for at least another hour." Victoria acknowledged the transmission while continuing her methodical patrol above the battlefield. An hour was an eternity in combat operations, long enough for situations to change dramatically and for new threats to emerge from unexpected directions. But it was also exactly the kind of challenge that separated routine flights from the missions that defined military careers. Below her, the limestone caves held American soldiers whose lives depended entirely on her ability to detect and engage threats before they could mount another coordinated attack. Above her, the Afghan sky stretched endlessly blue, indifferent to the human drama playing out among the rocks and shadows far below. For Victoria, this was the moment when 12 years of training and experience crystallized into pure professional competence. Every hour in the simulator, every practice mission, every criticism from instructors who had underestimated her capabilities had prepared her for exactly this situation. Alone above hostile territory, responsible for keeping American soldiers alive through superior airmanship and tactical judgment. The betting pool from flight school seemed like ancient history now, a relic from a time when her worth had been measured in other people's expectations rather than her own demonstrated abilities. As she banked into another patrol orbit, Victoria smiled grimly at the irony. The instructors who had wagered on her failure had actually helped create the pilot who was now preventing American casualties in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. But the mission was far from over, and the mountains below still held secrets that could turn tactical success into strategic disaster. Victoria settled in for what promised to be the longest 90 minutes of her military career, knowing that every decision she made would be scrutinized long after the shooting stopped and the after-action reports were filed. The next phase of the mission began with a transmission that made Victoria's blood run cold. Wolverine's voice, previously calm and professional, now carried an edge of panic that experienced soldiers rarely displayed. "Reaper, we've got movement in the valley. multiple vehicles approaching from the south. This isn't a ragtag Taliban unit. These are military vehicles with coordinated movement patterns. They're setting up what looks like a blocking position between us and any potential extraction site. Victoria immediately banked toward the valley floor, her targeting system scanning for the new threats. What she saw through her sensors confirmed Wolverine's assessment and escalated the mission to an entirely new level of complexity. 4 vehicles, possibly armored personnel carriers, were moving with the precision of a trained military unit, establishing overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely costly. Wolverine, Reaper has visual on the vehicles. Confirm these are hostile units. Affirmative, Reaper. They've been firing on our position intermittently. These are definitely bad guys, but they're using equipment and tactics that suggest significant training and resources. The tactical picture was becoming increasingly clear and increasingly disturbing. Victoria was no longer dealing with local insurgents armed with small weapons and improvised explosives. The coordination, equipment, and tactical proficiency suggested foreign military involvement or sophisticated proxy forces with capabilities approaching those of regular armies. Lighthouse Reaper, I need immediate guidance on rules of engagement. The hostiles are displaying capabilities that exceed normal threat parameters for this area of operations. Santos's response came quickly but carried a tension that hadn't been present earlier. Reaper, you are cleared to engage all hostile targets that pose a threat to friendly forces. Be advised that higher command is extremely interested in any intelligence you can gather about enemy capabilities and equipment. Victoria understood the subtext. She wasn't just providing close air support. She was conducting reconnaissance against an enemy whose presence in Afghanistan represented a significant intelligence failure or a dramatic escalation in the complexity of regional conflicts. Copy Lighthouse, beginning attack run on armored vehicles in the valley. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon was specifically designed to destroy armored vehicles, and Victoria had trained extensively in anti-armor tactics. But attacking stationary targets was fundamentally different from engaging vehicles that were actively maneuvering and potentially equipped with anti-aircraft capabilities. As she rolled into her attack run, Victoria's threat warning system suddenly activated. The distinctive sound of radar lock-on filled her headset. Someone on the ground was painting her aircraft with target acquisition radar. The professional calm she had maintained throughout the mission gave way to the hypervigilance that came with being actively targeted by sophisticated weapons systems. Wolverine, Reaper is taking radar lock from ground-based systems. These hostiles have anti-aircraft capabilities. I'm aborting this attack run and will attempt to engage from outside their engagement envelope. Victoria pulled the A-10 into a steep climb, using the aircraft's maneuverability to break the radar lock while simultaneously gaining altitude that would put her beyond the range of most portable air defense systems. The tactical situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Reaper, Wolverine copies. We can see what looks like shoulder-fired missiles among the hostile positions. You need to be extremely careful. These guys came prepared for air cover. The revelation that the enemy possessed surface-to-air missiles changed everything. Victoria was no longer just providing close air support. She was operating in a contested air environment against adversaries who had anticipated air intervention and prepared accordingly. Every approach to the target area would now require careful planning to avoid missile engagement zones. Lighthouse Reaper, I need immediate tactical support. Enemy forces are equipped with radar-guided anti-aircraft systems and portable SAMs. This has become a contested air environment. The silence that followed lasted exactly 10 seconds, long enough for Victoria to understand that she had just reported something that higher command hadn't expected and wasn't prepared to handle. When Santos finally responded, Her voice carried the weight of someone transmitting information that would trigger significant activity at multiple command levels. Reaper, copy your assessment. We're immediately notifying Theater Command and scrambling additional air support with SCAD capabilities. Can you maintain station and continue providing overwatch for Wolverine team? SCAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, meant that Command was treating this as a genuine air-to-air threat rather than a ground support mission. Victoria would soon have company in the form of aircraft, specifically designed to hunt and destroy the radar systems that were currently painting her with target acquisition beams. Lighthouse, Reaper can maintain station, but will need to operate at increased altitude to avoid missile engagement zones. This will reduce the precision of any fire support I can provide to Wolverine team. The tactical mathematics of the situation were becoming clear. Every action now required balancing the safety of the aircraft against the effectiveness of supporting ground forces. Too low, and she risked being shot down by missiles. Too high, and any weapons she deployed might endanger the very soldiers she was trying to protect. Wolverine, Reaper. I'm establishing a high-altitude orbit to avoid enemy air defenses. Can you provide detailed coordinates for any fire missions? I'll need precise targeting data to avoid danger-close situations. The response came immediately, delivered with the precision of someone who understood that miscommunication could prove fatal. Reaper, Wolverine Actual. We can provide laser designation for specific targets if you have compatible targeting systems. Our forward observer has a laser designator and can mark individual enemy positions. Victoria felt a surge of professional satisfaction. Laser-guided weapons would allow her to engage enemy positions with surgical precision while minimizing risk to friendly forces. The technology would compensate for the increased altitude she was being forced to maintain. Wolverine, Reaper is equipped for laser-guided munitions. Have your FO begin target designation on the armored vehicles in the valley. I'll engage with precision-guided weapons to minimize collateral damage. As she maneuvered into position for a precision strike, Victoria reflected on how dramatically the mission had evolved. What had begun as a search for missing personnel had become a complex air campaign against sophisticated adversaries, with capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of conflicts in Afghanistan. The laser designator appeared as a bright dot on her targeting display, marking one of the armored vehicles with the precision required for a successful precision-guided munitions attack. Victoria selected a Maverick missile from her weapons menu and waited for the targeting system to confirm lock-on. Wolverine Reaper has laser lock on target 1, missile away in 3, 2, 1, rifle. The Maverick missile separated from the A-10's wing pylon with a brief flash of rocket motor ignition, streaking toward the ground with the deadly accuracy that made precision-guided munitions the preferred weapons for danger-close situations. Victoria watched through her targeting system as the missile followed the laser designation directly to its intended target. The explosion, when it came, exceeded everyone's expectations. Instead of the controlled detonation typical of a missile impact, the target vehicle disappeared in a massive fireball that suggested the presence of ammunition or fuel that amplified the weapon's effects dramatically. Jesus Christ! Wolverine's voice carried amazement and relief in equal measure. Reaper, that was a direct hit with secondary explosions. The entire vehicle just disintegrated. Outstanding shooting. Victoria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before refocusing on the remaining targets. Wolverine, Reaper copies. Have your FO designate the next target. I've got 3 more Mavericks and plenty of cannon ammunition. The methodical destruction of enemy vehicles continued for the next 20 minutes, with each precision strike eliminating threats while demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of properly coordinated air-ground cooperation. By the time Victoria had expended her precision-guided munitions, The valley floor was littered with burning vehicles and scattered enemy equipment. Lighthouse Reaper. I've successfully engaged 4 armored vehicles with precision-guided munitions, all targets destroyed with significant secondary explosions. Enemy vehicle threat in the valley has been neutralized. Santos's response carried a note of professional admiration that made Victoria smile. Outstanding work, Reaper. Ground forces report that enemy fire has ceased entirely. You've broken their coordinated attack and given Wolverine team the breathing room they needed. But even as tactical success became apparent, Victoria understood that the strategic implications of the mission were only beginning to unfold. The sophistication of enemy equipment and tactics suggested foreign military involvement that would require intelligence analysis far above her pay grade. Wolverine Reaper, what's your current status? Can you move toward extraction, or do you still require overwatch? The answer came with obvious relief. Reaper, we can move. Your fire support has eliminated the immediate threats, and we've got 2 casualties who need medical attention as soon as possible. We're preparing to displace toward the extraction point. Victoria established a wide patrol pattern above the area as Wolverine team began their movement toward safety. The mission was approaching successful completion, but she remained vigilant for any additional threats that might emerge from the complex terrain. As she watched American soldiers moving carefully through the mountainous landscape below, Victoria thought about the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. 12 years ago, flight instructors had bet money on her failure, unable to see past their preconceptions to recognize her potential. Today, those same instincts and capabilities had prevented a tactical disaster and saved American lives. The irony was profound, but the satisfaction was earned through years of dedication to professional excellence rather than any desire to prove doubters wrong. Victoria had become the pilot she was meant to be, not because of the betting pool, but despite it. Reaper 17, this is Dustoff 73. We're inbound to your location for medical evacuation of Wolverine team casualties. Request you maintain overwatch during extraction operations. Victoria keyed her microphone to acknowledge the medical evacuation helicopter while scanning the surrounding terrain for any signs of remaining enemy activity. Dustoff 73, Reaper 17. Area appears secure, but recommend you approach from the southeast to avoid potential contact areas. I'll maintain high cover during your extraction. The distinctive sound of rotors announced the arrival of the medical evacuation helicopter, a A-60 Black Hawk configured for casualty evacuation and equipped with the medical equipment necessary to stabilize wounded soldiers during transport. Victoria watched through her targeting system as the helicopter settled into the improvised landing zone Wolverine team had established on a relatively flat section of the mountainside. Wolverine, this is Dustoff. We're on the ground. Get your casualties aboard as quickly as possible. The evacuation proceeded with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had performed similar operations countless times under combat conditions. Within minutes, the wounded soldiers were aboard the helicopter, and the remaining team members had secured the area for departure. Dustoff 73, this is Wolverine Actual. All personnel are aboard and ready for departure. Thanks for the ride home. Victoria maintained her protective orbit as the medical helicopter lifted off and began its flight toward the military hospital at Bagram Airfield. The immediate mission was complete. Missing American soldiers had been located, rescued, and were receiving the medical attention they needed. But the strategic implications of what had been discovered during the mission were only beginning to unfold. Lighthouse Reaper. Mission appears complete. Wolverine team has been successfully extracted and is en route to medical facilities. Request permission to return to base for debriefing. Santos's response carried a note of satisfaction that Victoria shared. Reaper, mission complete. Outstanding work today. You're cleared to return to base. Debrief will be conducted immediately upon your arrival, and Victoria, that was exceptional flying under extremely difficult circumstances. The use of her first name rather than her call sign indicated that the formal mission structure was relaxing, allowing for the kind of personal recognition that military professionals rarely express during active operations. Victoria appreciated the gesture, while understanding that the real evaluation of her performance would come during the detailed debriefing that would follow her return to Bagram. As she banked toward home, Victoria reflected on the mission that had tested every aspect of her training and experience. She had successfully located missing personnel, engaged sophisticated enemy forces, adapted to changing tactical situations, and coordinated complex operations involving multiple aircraft and ground units. The mission would undoubtedly be studied as an example of effective close air support and adaptive tactical thinking. But beyond the professional accomplishments, Victoria recognized that the mission represented something more personal. 12 years after flight instructors had wagered on her failure, she had demonstrated the kind of airmanship and tactical judgment that justified every hour of training and every challenge she had overcome to reach this point in her career. The A-10 responded to her control inputs with the reliability of a trusted partner as she navigated toward Bagram Airfield. The aircraft had performed flawlessly throughout the mission, delivering precision firepower when needed and maintaining the kind of reliability that allowed pilots to focus on tactical decisions rather than mechanical concerns. Bagram Tower, this is Reaper 17 requesting clearance for landing. Mission complete. Reaper 17, Bagram Tower. You are cleared to land runway 09. Welcome home and congratulations on a successful mission. Victoria felt the familiar satisfaction of a safe return as the runway numbers grew larger in her windscreen. The mission that had begun with mystery and uncertainty was ending with tactical success and strategic intelligence that would influence operations throughout the region. As the A-10's landing gear touched the runway and the aircraft began its rollout, Victoria allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had done her job with the kind of professional competence that honored both her training and the trust placed in her by the soldiers whose lives had depended on her tactical judgment. The betting pool from flight school seemed like ancient history now, a reminder of a time when her worth had been measured by other people's expectations rather than her own demonstrated abilities. Today's mission had proven that the only opinions that mattered were those of the people who depended on her professional competence when their lives hung in the balance. Victoria taxied toward the parking area where ground crews waited to secure the aircraft and begin the post-mission maintenance that would prepare it for the next time American soldiers needed close air support in hostile territory. The mission was complete, but the aircraft and pilot would be ready when called upon again. The debriefing session began 30 minutes after Victoria's return to Bagram, conducted in a secure conference room with representatives from intelligence, operations, and higher command participating via secure video link. Colonel Henderson led the session with the methodical thoroughness that characterized professional military analysis. Major Kozlowski, let's begin with your assessment of enemy capabilities and equipment observed during the mission. Victoria consulted her kneeboard notes while organizing her thoughts. The intelligence value of her observations would influence tactical planning for future operations throughout the region. Sir, the enemy forces displayed capabilities significantly exceeding normal Taliban or insurgent profiles. They possessed armored vehicles, coordinated tactics, radar-guided anti-aircraft systems, and portable surface-to-air missiles. The level of organization and equipment suggests either foreign military advisors or proxy forces with access to sophisticated weapon systems. The intelligence officer leaned forward with obvious interest. Major, can you provide more specific details about the anti-aircraft systems? Any identification of manufacturer or origin? The radar signatures were consistent with systems I've encountered in training scenarios, but I wasn't able to make positive identification of specific manufacturers. However, the sophistication of the target acquisition and the coordinated nature of their employment suggests professional military training rather than improvised insurgent tactics. Henderson nodded while making notes. Your assessment is consistent with intelligence reports we've been receiving from other areas of operations. This appears to be part of a broader pattern of capability escalation that has strategic implications beyond this specific mission. The debriefing continued for nearly 2 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from initial contact through final extraction.